Welcome to another episode of Fair and Balanced. I'm your host, Kevin Barrett, doing the show every Tuesday, same time, same channel, right here on noliesradio.org. Today we're taking up one of the most controversial questions in the 9/11 truth movement, the question of the identities of the aircraft used in the 9/11 attacks. There's been all sorts of talk about what might have happened at the Pentagon, all sorts of talk about what might have happened at Shanksville, and today we're going to be offering some talk about what did and didn't happen, or especially what didn't happen, at the World Trade Center. There is a brand new DVD out from Pilots for 9/11 Truth, and when I say brand new, I mean brand new. I think it just came out like this weekend. It's called 9/11 World Trade Center Attack. And I was going to have Rob Balsamo, who is the main pilot of the Pilots for 9/11 Truth aircraft, on with me today talking about that video. Unfortunately, Rob had a kind of an emergency engagement come up, and so he's turned me over to one of his ablest co-pilots at Pilots for 9/11 Truth, and that is Ralph Kolstad. Ralph has logged 23,000 hours, which is way beyond what even Rob has logged. He has 27 years in the airlines. He's flown Boeing 757s and 767s for 13 years, mainly as an international captain with American Airlines. He spent 20 years flying U.S. Navy fighter jets off aircraft carriers and was a Top Gun twice. He's also got experience in civilian gliders, light aircrafts, warbirds, and on and on and on. So, hey, we've got a very qualified pilot with us to make sense of whether or not those alleged Boeing 767s could have been used at the speeds we're told they were flown to hit the World Trade Center, which is, of course, the main topic of this great new DVD from Pilots, 9/11 World Trade Center Attack. So, hey, it's an honor to welcome Ralph Kolstad to Fair and Balanced. How you doing, Ralph?
Good day, Kevin. I'm doing wonderful.
Well, it's good to have you on. That's brand new to my shows, and I appreciate your coming on short notice.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Okay. Well, boy, within the 9/11 truth movement, which generally has concluded that 9/11 was a false flag attack on the basis of all sorts of evidence, and lately, especially the evidence that the World Trade Center skyscrapers, all three of them, were taken down in controlled demolitions that involved high-grade nanothermite explosives. There's been a bit of controversy about the question of the airlines that the government tells us were involved in this attack. And this new DVD in which you feature, 9/11 World Trade Center Attack, makes the case, and I think it makes a very strong case, that these relatively inexperienced pilots that were told, flew these commercial aircraft into the World Trade Center at very high speeds, could not possibly have done so. Do you agree with that conclusion, and what's the basis for that?
I would absolutely agree with that conclusion. And one of the things that comes out in this latest DVD, which I did not know prior to watching this DVD, was the fact that a couple of the other Pilots for 9/11 Truth movement were check airmen at another airline, and after they completed their sim check, they requested a couple of pilots who had done a good job to see if they could actually simulate flying their airplane into the World Trade Center, into either one of the buildings. And these are people that have many thousands of hours of experience, plus could be many thousands of hours on a particular type of airplane. So the more experience you have on a type of airplane, the better you get at being able to handle it. And what was interesting was when these highly qualified pilots were asked to fly the simulator into the World Trade Center, not one of them could do it on the first attempt. As a matter of fact, they discovered that the only way they could actually hit the Trade Center would be if they were at basically landing speeds. So if they were trying to fly at these very high speeds, every single one of these highly experienced pilots actually missed the World Trade Center. And I find that real interesting. I had never heard that before. But in the discussion that I had with Rob, we had more of a discussion about the speeds that we were told would be the speeds that the airplanes hit the Tower 1 and Tower 2. And it's pretty obvious that either the information we were given was erroneous, or there's other possibilities, and we can certainly go into that. But that would be conjecture. But based upon the fact that the speeds given to us by the government, there's just no physical possibility that it could happen that way.
And the argument, the way it's laid out in the video, is very interesting, and it looks like a very strong argument. I followed, the back and forth between Rob and some of the doubters on this, and it looks to me like Rob's got the upper hand here. He points out that UA-175, which was videotaped by various cameras going into the South Tower, so the speed there is, between the videotapes and the radar data, it looks like it's coming from a lot of sources that are pretty accurate, was 510 knots. And Rob and you guys point out in the video that 510 knots at sea level is a very highly improbable speed, not only for anybody to control an aircraft like that, but for the aircraft to even hang together. Now, why is that?
Very simply, laws of physics says these airplanes are designed for commercial use. They're stable. They don't do aerobatics. They're not designed for high speed. They're designed for a high altitude cruise speed that's consistent with the rest of air traffic control. So down low, Boeing has limited the airplane to 360 knots, and this is still an extremely high speed at low altitude, and to imagine that they were 150 knots over the maximum design speed or limitation speed, I'm sure that there's a safety factor involved. So if Boeing says that the limitation is 360 knots, then I would assume that there's a 20 or 30 or maybe even a 50% safety factor before the airplane actually comes apart. If you remember by watching the video, they had done some flutter testing on a 747 and on an A6, and when they go beyond their design speed by much, then they start having serious control ramifications. So the speed of 510 knots is patently absurd, particularly at sea level where we have the most dense air. I've got well over 6,000 hours on 757 and 76 aircraft, and I think it would be extremely difficult for me to be able to handle an airplane once it goes into that kind of high speed. There's also something called Mach tuck. The higher the speed, it tends to force the airplane even to go faster, and it becomes more and more difficult to control the airplane at the higher speeds. I guess that's about it for now.
Yeah, that covers it pretty well. The DVD also uses Egypt Air, 990, I think? Yeah, Egypt Air 990, which crashed allegedly because one of the pilots plunged the joystick forward and took it kind of straight down.
Right.
The Egyptian investigators didn't agree with that conclusion and thought there was something else involved. But we won't get into that. In any case, Egypt Air 990 plunged toward the sea, and according to the DVD, it reached its highest speed of 603 knots at 22,000 feet, and that is the equivalent of 0.99 Mach, or almost the speed of sound at that altitude, and that's when it presumably broke up, because that's when the black box data stopped, and that means that it was breaking up. So if it broke up at that speed, at that altitude, then according to the calculations in the DVD, UA-175 presumably would have broken up before it got anywhere near its 510 knots at sea level, which is 1.19 Mach. Am I getting this right?
I agree with that completely. Having flown supersonic myself several times, there's something called what we call max Q. That's the maximum amount of energy that the airplane can go through. And if you listen to the space shuttle launches, you'll hear them talk about max Q, so around 24,000 feet they have to throttle back because they've got way too much energy, but there's still too much atmosphere, and so it could cause a real structural problem for the space shuttle. I don't know if you remember that or not, but that right around 22 to 24,000 feet is where that occurs. And so even the space shuttle has to throttle back so it doesn't exceed its design capability. Now, that's completely different aerodynamics, but it's the point that that's the altitude where you have the maximum combination of speed and air pressure, etc. And that's, I would agree, and at 757 or 767 would have to be in a straight down nose dive to get anywhere near that close a speed. In other words, if you were trying to do a speed run straight and level, you would not come anywhere near close to that speed. And from the trajectories that we have reviewed on both the Tower 1 and Tower 2 aircraft, they were not coming down in a straight down dive. They were maybe a very shallow dive, if at all. And I just can't imagine that these aircraft would be capable, physically capable, have the excess amount of thrust and with the air pressure and density as it is at sea level, to reach anywhere near that kind of speed.
Well, it's interesting, and you're not the only pilot with a lot of experience in these kind of aircraft who said that. There have been a few pilots who've opined differently, and overall, even though you and it seems to me the more credible voices are saying that these speeds of, especially UA-175's alleged speed of 510 knots at sea level before it hit the tower is completely ridiculous. And yet, somehow this story that we've been given with all of this data that we've been given has stood thus far for 8 years. If the story is that absurd, why is there anybody supporting it, and how can it still be standing?
Good question. I wasn't flying on 9/11. I happened to be at home in between trips. And within a few days, I started suspecting something was wrong. Of course, everyone was in shock the first, few days and stuff. And then I ended up purchasing a book called Painful Questions by Eric Hufschmidt. And I would take that with me on my trips. And I would try to talk with the first officers if we ever got around to talking about 9/11, and I'd ask them what they thought. And it was amazing to me, even after looking at the books, even after looking at much of the other evidence, they wanted to believe what the government was telling us. And it maybe that's a microcosm of what's happening in America today, is that we've got people that are not willing or capable of using their own mind to think about stuff and then make their own decisions rather than being told what to believe. Of course, that goes into a whole other aspect, but to me it was amazing how many all reputable pilots, airline pilots with a lot of experience, just bought the story without question.
Indeed. Well, I could understand why a pilot, might look at Hufschmidt's book and, due to the, psychological impact of this psychological operation on 9/11, not be willing to go there, look at that book with kind of a certain defense mechanism preventing them from understanding what they were seeing. But I would think that pilots with experience in this kind of aircraft who were shown what the official speeds were, would quickly scratch their heads and say, wait a minute, this doesn't add up.
You're assuming that they actually think about things like that. And that was basically my point a moment ago, was the fact that once they've been told the story, then they don't use their own God-given brain to sort of out if that's feasible, if it's reasonable, and if not, why not? And if not, then what are the ramifications of that, which, obviously the ramifications of 9/11 are a war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and based on the war on terror. So if the story about 9/11 was false, then maybe these wars are false too. Anyway, that's another subject in itself. However, my point being that once people are told by the government what happened, they click off their brain and they go about their business of, go and play golf or, work with the kids or going to the soccer game, etc. And they don't think about it again. And it appears that there's a lot of people that are sound asleep.
Well, I've noticed that too, Ralph. But again, it's still, they still have to come up with some kind of counter argument. And I've been doing this kind of stuff for years. I'd go out and do teach-ins at the University of Wisconsin campus and engage with engineering professors. And some of these alleged engineering professors were telling me that things like the plane hit the tower and the tower instantly collapsed, or they were telling me things like the jet fuel melted the steel and made it collapse.
That's a great story.
Yeah, I mean, it's, and then I'd say, wait a minute, the highest possible open air burn for any kind of hydrocarbon fire is 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit less than the temperature that melts steel. How can you say this? And they say, oh, what do you know? You're a humanist. I'm an engineering professor. So I'm used to this kind of stuff. Right. I guess this leads to the next question. What kinds of counter arguments do people come up with when you say, look, 510 knots at sea level, hitting a target that's only less than or about 50 feet wider than the aircraft is?
Yeah, wasn't that an interesting statistic in the movie?
That's right, yeah. 208-foot wide tower, 156-foot wingspan on the aircraft. So you have to be pretty accurate.
That means you can't be more than 25 feet off center or you miss.
Right. And then
reminds me of flying off the aircraft carrier when I was flying the F-14. The wingspan of the F-14 was 68 feet. The width of the runway on the aircraft carrier was 75 feet. And there's 6 foot difference when you have to land on centerline. So you can't be more than 3 feet off of centerline or they're going to wave you off. And oh, by the way, the ship's always moving away from you, so the centerline's canted and it's moving away from you the entire time. So I'm telling you that I could not do what these guys did. These so-called brand new pilots flew these airplanes into these buildings. I couldn't do that.
So if you sit down with some other pilot, and you get like 30 seconds with them and say, look, these guys who couldn't fly, the best pilot among these hijacker pilots, Henny Hensher, was denied, renting a Cessna because he couldn't handle it at 100 knots or less, and yet supposedly these guys did these amazing kinds of feats at speeds in the case of at least one of these aircraft, UA-175, at a speed considerably above the speed that would cause the aircraft to break up. You point that out to the pilots. What are their counter arguments?
That's what's real interesting. They really don't have any counter arguments. Then at that point, since they can't discuss the facts, then they go to character assassination and distractors in an argument because they can't discuss the facts. So next thing you know, it becomes a more of an emotional discussion, and of course at that point, they're just any kind of an adult discussion disagreement is gone.
Interesting, yeah. That seems to happen a lot in 9/11, but in these kinds of areas where there's professional expertise involved, and you would think that there would be a consensus, pretty quickly, arrived at consensus among experienced pilots on this. Right.
Interesting. From what I've heard from Rob, when he's talking to other pilots who are taking the other side, again, it's the same kind of thing. Well, what's your experience? And they don't necessarily give their experience, or they give their something that can't be proven. So there's the distractors, to me, seem completely out of sorts with the discussion at hand.
And there have been people in the 9/11 truth movement also who have tried to shy away from this impossible speed argument or find some kind of a counter argument. And I thought probably the most interesting one was John Bursell, who's a respected 9/11 truth leader in Australia who has some aircraft experience, went and tried to do a World Trade Center hit type thing, or at least get up to that speed on a flight simulator. And he was able to do it, although he did have to disable the overspeed alarm.
Right.
And Rob explains why that probably was not a valid experiment, and I think John probably more or less accepts that now, although maybe I'll have to have him on the show to find out. But I think the reason that people like John are afraid of this particular, impossible speed argument is they're afraid that it's going to be used by people who will claim that holograms or something hit the World Trade Center. What's your take on that?
I agree with Rob completely that the simulator is not really designed to give actual air characteristics. I mean, it can simulate turbulence and it can simulate thunderstorms and that kind of stuff, but it's not designed to simulate accurately the high-speed issue which would happen in the real airplane. So by pulling the warnings, the high-speed the overspeed warnings, circuit breaker would certainly disable the clackers and the mock tuck pushover of the stick. So that would certainly work, but the simulators are not designed to do what this guy was trying to do. And so if you could put it into as high speed, well, the simulator doesn't know any different. You just put the throttles full up and it'll go until the airspeed wraps itself around and you don't know what it is. But because it doesn't have that type of thing programmed into the computer. That's, every kind of issue that's programmed into the computer is going to cost money. And since we're not practicing for that, we're not trying to see how fast it'll go. And I don't think they ever programmed that into it because that would cost extra money.
They certainly wouldn't program into the simulator the ability to break up into pieces.
No,
okay,
that's right.
All right, well, we'll pick this up then on the other end of the break. We're going to go ahead and go into our 5-minute mid-show break. This is Kevin Barrett here on Fair and Balanced, and we were supposed to be talking with Rob Balsamo of Pilots for 9/11 Truth. Instead, we've got his co-pilot, Ralph Kolstad, a 23,000-hour pilot with extensive experience in the same 767s that were allegedly used to hit the World Trade Center. He says that story is completely ridiculous given the impossible speeds and the impossible feats of piloting. We'll talk some more about it when we come back after the break. So stick around.
You're listening to No Lies Radio, coming to you 24/7 from the San Francisco Bay Area north of Berkeley. Your radio station for the truth, peace, justice, freedom, and more power to the people.
Welcome back to the second half of today's episode of Fair and Balanced. I'm Kevin Barrett. My website is truthjihad.com, and by going there you can figure out how to purchase my latest book, but don't just buy one, buy 10 for only $50. The book is called Questioning the War on Terror, a primer for Obama voters. It's designed to take your average Obama voter who doesn't understand issues like 9/11 Truth all the way from seeing why the war on terror is a hoax right up to questioning 9/11. And it's very effective. It's been carefully tested, and you can get those 10 copies for only $50, $5 a copy. Hand them out. Throw them at Obama voters if necessary. And once again, that's all at truthjihad.com. Well, today, I was originally planning to be talking with Rob Balsamo of Pilots for 9/11 Truth, but Rob had to hit the ejection seat button, and he's probably parachuting down to some beautiful South Sea island right now. So we've got the co-pilot in charge, Ralph Kolstad, but we're in good hands. Ralph has 23,000 hours of flying, spent 27 years in the airlines, extensive experience on 757s and 767s. He has hit narrow targets with airplanes, taking these fighter jets down onto aircraft carriers, which he says is a whole lot easier than trying to hit the World Trade Center towers at high speed, as these non-pilots allegedly did on 9/11. Well, Ralph, I appreciate your coming on and giving us some of this technical expertise, and I'm going to continue the line of discussion from before the break. We were talking about what are the possible counter-arguments to these what appear to be very strong arguments for impossible speed and impossible piloting with regard to the planes that allegedly hit the World Trade Center. And there are people in the 9/11 Truth Movement that really shy away from this and have tried to come up with counter-arguments. I think, my sense is that they've largely lost, and at this point would admit that these probably were not commercial 767s. But why do you think there's been resistance to this within the 9/11 Truth Movement, as well as from defenders of the official version?
Let me first start by saying I'm trying to avoid your question, actually, Kevin.
All right. Well, avoid it entertainingly, informatively, and that's fine.
The reason is being somewhat of a logic person, I haven't been able to figure out what kind of logic they're using to justify their position. And as we talked earlier, it goes from trying to have an adult conversation, a disagreement, a discussion with different points of view, to almost immediately into character attacks and emotional issues, which then becomes a destruction of the adult disagreements. So I don't have an answer as to what kind of justification they use to support the other side, when, to me, the facts are so clear that it's QED. There can be no discussion unless you're deluded, or you really don't know what you're talking about, and you don't have any experience. We've seen a lot of discussions on the internet where people are talking about something that they know nothing about. But if you're trying to talk this with other airline pilots and you find that they're defending the government's position, I haven't been able to find a legitimate argument to do that yet. I hope that more or less answers the question.
Good enough for now. As for the Pilot's DVD, this brand new DVD at pilotsfor911truth.org, which is called 9/11 World Trade Center Attack, says what you just said in the first half of the show, which is that there are really only two possibilities here. Either the government's data about the speed of these aircraft is wrong, or these were not commercial 767s. Now, let's just, I know you don't want to speculate, but let's just imagine that, in fact, the government's data is correct and that these were not 767s. Is it conceivable that some kind of large aircraft that might be mistaken for 757s or 767s, rather, could be flown by remote control into this kind of a target at this kind of high speed?
Well, I think you really hit the nail on the head, Kevin, the fact that either the information is incorrect, and I would suggest that Rob's analysis is about as good as you can get to say that if the data was given was incorrect using the assumptions that we have, or there's something else going on. And the something else going on now gets into conjecture, and there's many different theories as to what that might be. One of the best videos I think I've ever seen was In Plain Sight, which goes into an incredible detail about what kind of an airplane it possibly could have been and what other issues were. And if you haven't seen the video, anyone who's interested in 9/11 really should get that video and watch it. It presents some other possibilities. And rather than getting into conjecture and trying to support any other particular theory, all I'm saying, just like Rob's saying, is that the information that we don't know what really happened, but we can tell you that the story we've been told is not true. So it would be easy to follow through with the fact that it might be a remote piloted 757 or 767, because they sure were in the shape of that kind of an airplane, and remote piloted into an impact point. For example, we could launch a missile from a submarine, submerged, and hit a target within a matter of 100 feet, maybe several hundred miles away. So our military certainly has the capability to pre-program a flight path such that it's going to hit that target and be that accurate that we saw on September 11th, 2001. So the capability is there. Now, if that is in fact what happened, and I'm not saying it did, I'm just saying that's a fairly good conjecture, then that opens up a Pandora's box of other questions. For example, if that's the case, who did that? If it was our military, why would they do that to ourselves? And we can go there and say, well, let's look what happened since. Follow the money. Look who benefits. So we've got the Homeland Security Act, we've got 2 Patriot Acts, we've got a war in Iraq, we've got a war in Afghanistan, and there are certain people who have benefited from that. Not the American people. We're the last ones in line for benefiting, and certainly don't want to take away the loss of almost 3,000 people. So that's one other possibility, and there's several others, but if we're going to buy the fact that this war on terror is based upon September 11th, then we need to know what the facts are, and from what Pilots for 9/11 Truth is showing without question, whether it was the Pentagon, whether it was the World Trade Center, or even Pennsylvania, that the story we've been told is patently false.
Well, amen to all of that. One quick clarification about what you said when you said that a 757 could be guided by the military into its target,
I didn't quite say that. It's a possibility, put it that way.
Well, would it have to be modified so it could do that at 510 plus knots?
To me, it would certainly, yes, I think it would have to, because I don't think that the airplane, as designed by Boeing, will do that. So I think it must have been modified. If that's the theory we're going to go with. Again, I'm not going to support any particular theory because we just don't have enough proof one way or another. But again, like Rob, I'm just going to say what I believe can't be true. That doesn't mean I know what is true.
Well, yeah, I think that's a really good kind of attitude from pilots. And speaking of the organization, Pilots for 9/11 Truth, tell us a little bit about that. How many people are members now? How many pilots? And how do you do outreach to other pilots?
Wow, that's a good question. I'm not really involved in the administration part of it, but I know that there are hundreds, and we've got many senior military pilots. We've got lots of commercial pilots. We've got junior pilots. We've got many pilots from overseas, outside this country, that have joined and come on and are supporting the research of trying to prove whether the story we've been told about 9/11, which is the basis for all of the other issues, the Department of Homeland Security, the Patriot Act, the War on Terror, the war in Afghanistan and Iraq, if based upon a lie, then all those things are questionable as to their need and their reason for support. So that would actually have to be asked, or the question would be best asked to Rob, and he can give you a much better idea as to how many there are and the outreach.
Yeah, I've forgotten, but I recall that Rob saying that we're well up into the many hundreds now. I forget exactly how many hundreds. I don't know if he's quite in a race with Richard Gage over at Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. I think Richard has broken 800 now, and I don't know if Rob is a little behind that. But in any case, it's really important to get these professional groups off the ground, as it were. And when I travel on commercial airlines, Ralph, I always bring DVDs along with the pilot's website on them, and I hand these DVDs out to the airline personnel. I always make sure I give at least one to the pilot and to any of the other crew members who wants one. But the pilot always gets one when I leave the aircraft, and I found they always accept them.
Excellent.
I have a gift for you, here, and they're always, if you're smiling and friendly as you leave, and everybody's happy that you just had a successful flight. They'll always take the DVD. So that's the outreach I'm doing, and other people who do any commercial airline travel, which is pretty hellish in the post 9/11 era, but they'll have to do it sometimes. I urge people to do that, and these pilots' DVDs are good DVDs, of course, to give to pilots. So that's another reason to go get them at the website.
Excellent idea. That's a great idea.
Yeah, well, that's you have to kind of take advantage of what you got when you're trying to spread a message that's this important and this hard to spread.
Right.
Well, Ralph, let me move into another slightly controversial point. There are people who may agree with Rob that it's better for people in groups like pilots to not have their own conjectures about what might happen on 9/11, but rather to look at whether the government story holds up and prove beyond any doubt that it doesn't, which is what pilots has done as an organization. But there are people within pilots that have their own ideas about things, just like any other group is going to have people with all sorts of different ideas.
Sure. And
in particular, John Lear, who's one of the most highly qualified members of pilots, has aroused a lot of controversy because he says a lot of things that sound crazy to most people, like there alien bases on the moon, and I forget if that's something like that. And he also has argued in favor of the no planes hypothesis. That is that there weren't any planes at all that hit the World Trade Center, and this many people think is bad publicity for the 9/11 Truth Movement. It makes us all look crazy. And therefore, it's a very bad situation to have John in the group saying things like that. Can't we either make him shut up or kick him out? What's your take on that?
Oh, I think any time that you muzzle someone, then we're into censorship. I think John is an extremely capable pilot, and he's a very sharp guy, and he certainly has done his own research, which is different than everybody else. I would suspect that everyone in the Pilots for 9/11 Truth may have their own feelings about what happened or what didn't happen. And to shut up any kind of reasonable discussion, I think is ridiculous. Because when, they always say that 2 heads are better than 1 and 400 would be better than 1 also, but there's got to be a reasonable dialogue. And as long as he's not representing Pilots for 9/11 Truth when he goes on to that kind of stuff, then I personally don't have a problem with it. I kind of believe that you're allowed to speak your own piece.
Well, that makes sense to me too. But so, some of these people who are upset with John are also upset because they feel like they haven't been allowed to debate the issue with him on the pilots forum. And I'm not on the pilots forum, so I don't know what's going on there. But I know there's at least one person I've had on the show before who's gotten very frustrated because he claims he was says, these are dangerous ideas. I'm trying to shoot them down, and then I got booted off the forum for attacking a member, namely John Lear. You think that is the pilots forum being maintained responsibly and neutrally on these things?
Well, I suspect so. I haven't been on it for a while myself, but if emails and forums and blogs can be very difficult places. I don't know if you've ever had an experience of talking with someone on an email and get it completely taken out of context and or completely missing the emotional aspect, whether it's positive or negative, and having things go bad based upon emails. That can be the same thing with this, where it's easy to vent your frustration in an email to somebody because they're not sitting right there and you're not facing them. And sometimes we can get a little bit beyond what our normal means of communication would be. And I can't speak for either one of the people, but I just would certainly hope that if you keep it reasonable and you take away any of the character assassination or the emotional vindictiveness during a blog or on a forum, and I don't know what happened there, but if that was the case, I wouldn't blame Rom for taking him off. But I don't know that happened.
Yeah, there's all sorts of problems like that, and I think you're absolutely on the money, Ralph, with your talking about how the internet makes it way too easy for people to get into these kinds of character assassination, flame wars, these ad hominem attacks against the person rather than trying to discuss the argument that the person is presenting.
Exactly. And that's why I pretty much stay off the forums, and I don't get into blogs, and I don't get into that because I did that for a while when I was communications chairman for the American Airlines Pilot Union. I had to for a while, and boy, the vindictiveness, like you say, the ad hominem attacks, you can't have a legitimate discussion about that without all kinds of other issues that come in. Now, if you could actually keep it to that, then actually we could get somewhere, but that's why I don't follow any of the forums anymore, because it seems to develop into a character assassination.
Well, this kind of reminds me of the way, that most animals have various kinds of built-in blocks against badly hurting or killing members of their own species, except in extreme circumstances, and human beings do too. And gradually, technology, I think, has been developing to disarm those built-in blocks and to allow us to kill each other with guns, for example. If we didn't have guns and or even knives, and you had to kill somebody with your bare hands, you'd never do it. It'd be very once in a while maybe. So, yeah, I think the murder rate would drop.
Yeah, well, that's certainly an interesting discussion. I've never thought about that, but I think that's accurate. Yeah, well, I'll have to think about that.
Yeah, this applies to the internet flame wars too, because we have these kinds of feedback mechanisms with our facial expressions, our gestures, our tone of voice, the sense of the other person's physical bodily presence that kind of rein in our aggression. When we kind of get mad at somebody for what they say, all of these things moderate our tendency to go off on them. But on the internet, all that's taken away. And you're stuck feeling frustrated because you have this adrenaline surging and you're angry at the person on the other end of the internet, but you can't see them and you can't do anything physical against them, but you want to, and you have nothing, blocking your desire to go after them physically. So this anger then, I think, becomes unchained verbally, and you get these insane kinds of flame wars. And you never see that kind of thing in person. You don't even really see much of that on the telephone.
Except when you're driving on the freeway.
There you go. Well, automobiles are more technology that disarms this sort of natural protection.
Screaming and yelling at the other guy was such an idiot, of course, until he had his window down and he's trying to talk back to you. Now it's a whole different ballgame, isn't it? All of a sudden it changes quickly.
Yeah, or there's a real human being there.
Yeah, or if he actually pulls over behind you and starts following you, then instead of being the aggressor, all of a sudden you have some second thoughts about maybe you picked the wrong guy to pick on. So I never thought about what you're saying, but I think that's right. I think that's a good thing. We've taken away our inherent humanity towards people because you're doing it because it's impersonal. You don't have to do that to their face.
And that's why I think it's important to, within the 9/11 truth movement, which is, of course, riven by factionalism and people going off on each other on these flame wars, it's important to try to get together in person sometimes at conferences and actually see the people that you're dealing with, and also to get on these talk radio shows like mine and actually talk, because the tone of voice helps. It's better than nothing,
It certainly does.
I found just about everybody that comes on my show, which is almost all of the well-known 9/11 truth people, are able to have a reasonable discussion on the phone. And then I look at people who are just purely internet warriors who never talk to anybody. They won't return people's phone calls. A lot of them don't even have real names.
Yeah.
And those are the people that seem to be starting and maintaining most of the flame wars. So I urge those people to get out of your mom's basement and get out from behind your computer and go out into the real world and get on the phone at least with anybody you have a problem with in the 9/11 truth movement and talk it out. Go and meet them in person at a conference, and guess what? If people actually did that and stopped paying attention to these flame warriors in their mother's basements behind keyboards, I think we would have a more effective 9/11 truth movement.
Boy, isn't that the truth? That's extremely well said, and I agree with 100% of what you're saying. I've had a few distractors. I've had there's a group of ex-Navy pilots, actually backseaters, that attacked me because they'd never heard of me and they couldn't see how I could have done all that I did. And they claimed that I was a Top Gun instructor and all kinds of other stuff, which was patently not true, which I never claimed. It's been pretty clear about my career, and I can prove every bit of it. But, there's still people out there that, for whatever reason, just go on a personal attack because they can't fight the real story. Now, this particular guy was in Iraq as a backseater in F-14, and you know what? At first, I was pretty upset about the character assassination of me when Rob passed that along, and I thought about it for a little while, and then I didn't respond for a few days, and responded back to Rob and said, you know what? I actually kind of feel sorry for this guy because he's in Iraq, he's fighting a war so-called war on terror. And if we were to prove that 9/11 was fraudulent, then his war is fraudulent, then he's risking his life for something that's fraudulent. So he has to take that attitude that the war is legitimate. Otherwise, he cannot do his job as a warrior on the tip of the spear for the United States in Iraq. Now, I personally don't agree with that, but I can see his position that if he's there, he has to believe in it.
And a lot of other Americans are in a similar position, even if they're not on the front lines of these wars, because if they knew that this was an inside job, they would perhaps feel some kind of an obligation to go out and try and do something about it, which would then open them up to ridicule and employment troubles and who knows what all else. And that may be a big reason why a lot of people just don't want to go there.
Yeah, exactly. And here's a guy that's trying to build, let's assume he's trying to build a 20-year career in the military, and then he realizes that what he's doing is based upon a fraud. If he has any integrity at all, he's going to not only have to quit what he's doing, but he may have to quit the military and get another job, and start a whole new career. And that is really scary to a lot of people, and I certainly understand that. And that's why I did not share the flames over the internet back to the guy. As a matter of fact, I refused to talk with him. But the point being that I understand his position and I feel sorry for him.
Yeah, and I think that's really good to be able to have that kind of compassion or empathy or enough to understand how other people feel, to deal with people who have really different opposing viewpoints. I have that issue sometimes come up with Zionism because I'm a Muslim, and like the other 1.5 billion Muslims, I'm anti-Zionist, and there are a lot of people who, especially Jewish people, who've been brought up to believe that Israel is a good thing, who emotionally react really hard, badly to that, and I try to put myself in their shoes and think how it must feel to.
That's a discussion for another day.
It is, yeah. Maybe better not go there. I've gone there.
But I tend to agree with you, so that's all right.
Yeah. And so getting back to the guy who this fighter pilot or this guy in Iraq who was flaming you, he was attacking you because he was claiming that you pretended to be a Top Gun instructor. So, but I thought there was some kind of a Top Gun reference in your background. What is that?
I attended Top Gun twice. Once in 1975 as a student flying the F-4 Phantom, and the second time I was in the Naval Reserves flying the A-4 as the aggressor. If you remember the movie Top Gun, the A-4 was what Jester and Viper flew against Maverick and Goose. And that's exactly what I was doing in 1986 when I went to Top Gun the second time, 11 years after the first time. But I've never claim to be a Top Gun instructor. I have too much respect for the institution, for the people who are there, to ever claim something that would not be true. I mean, and I can verify that. I attended Top Gun twice, but I was never an instructor. But my position the second time was to go back to be an adversary instructor. So we provided the adversary to the fighters, and so it would be easy to mistake that for Top Gun instructor. I attended Top Gun and was an instructor when I went back to the squadron. So I could see how that would be confusing, but I never claimed to be a Top Gun instructor.
Yeah, I can see where that would come from. Often these people who attack you do seem, and this happens with all sorts of these flame warriors who attack various people, they often, take something like that and then twist it around. You said you attended Top Gun, and so then they twist it around and say, oh, he says he was an instructor at Top Gun. I've had that kind of thing thrown at me in many different ways, too.
So in other words, somebody with a little bit of knowledge is very dangerous.
Indeed, and there's certainly a lot of them out there, and they're all coming after us now thanks to the Internet.
Yeah. Well, it can be challenging, but, you keep your chin up and maintain your integrity. That's about all you got left.
I guess so, yeah. So hey, Ralph, in the couple minutes we have left, do you have any thoughts about what we could do to change course? By that I mean, changing this course we've been on since 9/11 by exposing 9/11, exposing the falsehoods, and hopefully getting at the truth. Do you have any specific ideas about what are the most effective kinds of things that people can be doing to make this historic change?
I think it's very similar to what you're doing, and that's one-on-one discussions with people, because we don't have the money, we don't have the power, we don't have the ability to go mass media. We can't change our mass media to telling us what's right and what's wrong, which is a mouthpiece for our government. But if we can reach one person at a time, and the more people we reach, and then they reach other people, and they reach other people, we can eventually get enough people to either change the way it's happening, or we can get the people to understand that the story's false, and they're going to have to tell us the truth of it ultimately. I don't know how else to do that. I think what you're doing, handing out DVDs, is a wonderful idea. I talk to people, and people, even my own daughter says, Dad, you're just crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. He says, well, Kendall, I've done my research, and this is what I've come up with. So that's the only way I know. I think Rob's doing a fantastic job with his Pilots for 9/11 Truth, and this is the same kind of thing we need, and we need to have coordination between this and the many other organizations that are out there trying to find the truth. We have the one common goal of trying to find the truth, and let's not beat each other up and be adversaries, even though we really have the same goal in mind.
Well, that sounds good to me. All right. Well, it's been great having you on, Ralph. I appreciate your coming on such short notice and doing such a great job.
Thank you.
Are you still working in the airlines?
I retired about 4 years ago. I left early due to many reasons. But I'll tell you what, once you realize that 9/11 was a false flag, it's real hard to go through security every day, even in uniform with an ID, and get strip searched because they don't trust the captain getting on his airplane.
You got to give those guys who were strip searching you the DVDs too.
That's for sure. I should have had those with me. And, back then, of course, they weren't even citizens, but, we won't go there. But anyway, that was only one of many reasons. But I left the airlines in 2005. And, I had a 28 years in the airline business and enjoyed it, and flew for about 17 years in the Navy, finished 20 years in the Navy Reserve. And it's been a real fun career, and it's just a shame to see where our industry has degenerated to these days.
It sure is. Well, I appreciate you're doing your part to try to get us back on a better course. Thank you, Ralph.
You're more than welcome, and nice to talk with you. Maybe another time.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That was Ralph Kolstad, pilot with Pilots for 9/11 Truth. And my upcoming radio shows will include all sorts of other fantastic and fascinating guests, including Annie Machon, a high-profile MI5 British secret agent whistleblower. She's working with a big 9/11 Truth conference that's going to be happening in Paris, I believe 2 weekends from now. I'll have her on my other show on the Evil Rival Network this Saturday evening, also with Adrian Salbucci, the Argentine anti-globalist economist. To find out about all that, you can go to truthjihad.com, click on the radio schedule link, follow the links, and you'll get to where you're going. Well, this is Kevin Barrett for No Lies Radio, or I should say for Fair and Balanced broadcast by way of noliesradio.org. Another excellent show. Come back next week and hear another one. See you then.
Most people think you're a nut.
Fringe element out there that believes the U.S. government orchestrated 9/11, that is President Bush and the American military killed 3,000 people. One of those pushing this theory is Kevin Barrett, who actually taught at the University of Wisconsin this fall.
I don't think this is the proper forum, though, for people that hold extremist views like yourself.
No, you guys are extremists. Fox News is the biggest bunch of extremists on the planet.
People see you as an extremist, and I don't think you're the most appropriate guy to teach that class.
I don't think you're the most appropriate guy to be on the airwaves spewing your venom throughout this country. I think you guys should be taken off the airwaves because you guys...
Silence the conservative.
Thank you.